I just hope to share information with you, a little bit of context about what the threat is, what the threat isn't, but more importantly, leave you with resources that you can navigate to understand what you can do from a business perspective, what information that you can share with the folks that work for you, and equally important information that you can bring home to your family. Again, all of the resources that I talk about today, especially a lot of the training I've shared with my family, because again, as I get into the presentation, when we talk about where these events unfold, it can be anywhere. They're places where we recreate, they're places where we shop. Sadly, they're places where we worship or go to school. And so again, the more that we can enhance preparedness, the better position I think we are as individuals, but also as a community. So this is just kind of a quick overview of what I want to go over today. And again, I've got a presentation. The government doesn't do anything without PowerPoint. So I'm glad that Kelsey had the technology solutions to help facilitate that. But again, the intent for today is not bore you with PowerPoint. I really want to leave you with information that you can take with. So after I get done with the presentation today and the follow-on questions, I'll share slides with Kelsey that she can push out to folks that registered. And again, just know that I'm a resource as well. So if you've got questions about anything that I talked about today, the resources that are on our website, please feel free to reach out. Kelsey has my contact information. It's included in the presentation that I'll push out. So again, just know that I'm a resource for you. And again, just thanks to Kelsey and Mike for reaching out and asking for us to come up and kind of share some of the resources that we have. So I like to start these presentations with a video. About severe weather. You know, the likelihood that you'll get a tornado is not very high, but there's very simple things we can do to prepare for that. So that's really what I'm trying to do with active assailant preparedness, is really to just talk with you a little bit, share some understanding of what the threat looks like, but more importantly, share with you resources about how you can be more prepared. But this video, this video is a little old now, but it does a good job of kind of just painting the picture as they go through the scenario to kind of provide a little context for what we're going to talk about today. Technology works.
It may feel like just another day at the office, but occasionally, life feels more like an action movie than reality. The authorities are working hard to protect you and to protect our public spaces. But sometimes bad people do bad things. Their motivations are different. The warning signs may vary, but the devastating effects are the same. And unfortunately, you need to be prepared for the worst.
I mean, it gets for those that have.
Sorry.
Sorry, that was my fault. I'll pause better for the next one. So I like to stop the video there simply because, you know, the rest gets a little bit graphic, but really the intent of the video is to kind of set the stage for what I want to talk about today. Again, as they went through it, they talked about, you know, people going about their daily business, whether at the office, whether where they were going out somewhere, but the fact that sometimes bad people do bad things. That's kind of the overarching. When we talk about active assailants, obviously there's a definition, and I want to make sure I differentiate between, you know, people that are involved in criminal activity, whether it's gang related, whether it's domestic violence or other reasons where guns or edged weapons or some other type of weapon may come into play. You know, an active shooter. An active shooter is somebody that's purposely gone to a location with the intent on harming people, using a weapon to do that, whether it's a gun, whether it's an edged weapon. And typically it's in a confined area. Most cases, there's no pattern to the selection of victims. We've studied these events, and that's been done, you know, in detail by the FBI, by the Secret Service, by my department. Again, they look very closely at these events. Typically, there may be an initial flashpoint, but then after that, it tends to be very random and unpredictable, which plays to our advantage. And I'll talk about that more as I go through the presentation. And again, the other piece is that they evolve very quickly. So again, that's the reason that we believe that, preparedness is really the key to active shooter or to be ready for that type of threat. As I already mentioned, these events can unfold in a variety of different locations. When I get into specifics, I'll talk more about what the study that the FBI did over about 20 years looked at. But again, it's places where we work, it's places where we go to school, places where we recreate, whether it's a concert, whether it's a nightclub, it's places where we worship. So again, the challenge, it creates a unique challenge from a law enforcement public safety perspective, because if you don't know where the threat's going to present itself, it kind of widens the envelope in terms of how you need to be prepared. And then sometimes, as this slide mentions, the individuals may have a history of negative, sometimes violent behavior, but there's no real one size fits all for who the individual might be that could perpetrate one of these events. So again, that makes it a challenge from a public safety standpoint, because it's difficult to identify. I mean, when you're working with criminals or you're working with gangs, you can ID the individuals, but in many of these events, oftentimes the individual is very below the radar. Not in all cases, but in many cases. In terms of duration, and this really speaks to to mentally set ourselves for, how we need to be prepared for these events. The typical duration is about 12 minutes if you look at the nationwide average for all of the active shooter events that have been looked at. But as you guys know here, location and jurisdiction resources can really drive that timeline. So again, if the incident happens in a geographically isolated area, then depending on how quickly you can get law enforcement on site, that can determine how long that event can last. And so again, that's why I say preparedness and awareness are really the key to helping our employees, our customers, and ourselves be more prepared for this event or for this type of situation. And again, I'm not here to say, I don't want to be a fear monger and tell you, hey, you need to be worried about this because it's going to happen tomorrow. It's like any other threat or hazard that Mike's worried about as the emergency management director for the county. It's just one of those things that if we put some thought into it, we put some resources into it, we're much better prepared if it happens to us. So this is the only interactive part, and there's only 4 folks in the room, unless they count the rest. So what do you think if you're Mike or me, we have a concern about a threat, and it doesn't matter, it could be a tornado, it could be severe weather, it could be an active shooter. What do you think the biggest challenge that we face, or the obstacle that we face when we're trying to look at preparedness for that threat?
Inattention.
Inattention is a good one. Any other thoughts?
Not knowing what to do.
Not knowing what to do, that's another good one. The biggest one, honestly, is belief. If you look at, and you look out in the western part of Minnesota when we had a lot of flooding, the person that's lived there for their whole lives, they've never been impacted by any other flood before. They know that we've got, a lot of water in the ground, we've got a lot of snow on top. It's going to be a quick rain on snow event. They're not worried about the flood because they've never been impacted before. So they don't believe that event's going to impact them. You look in the Gulf Coast or the Eastern Seaboard, there's a tornado or hurricane turning off coast, and it's the person they're interviewing with, because the media always goes there. They're interviewing the guy that's lived through 5 that I've never been impacted before, and I'm not leaving for this one. So it's really that belief piece. And again, the body can never go where the mind has never been. I'm not sure if folks have heard that saying before, but when you talk about active shooter, or active, any preparedness for any threat, if you haven't thought about what you're going to do if the fire alarm goes off, and haven't thought through what your procedures are going to be for, hey, where's the exit? How do I need to get out? Then it's going to be very difficult for you to be able to respond when you find yourself in that situation. So that belief piece is really key. Because again, I'm not here to say that this is a threat you need to be concerned about happening to you tomorrow or next week or maybe even this year. But again, statistically, the likelihood is very low. The challenges of the consequence is very high. So there's very simple things that we can do to be better prepared for the threat. And that's what I really want to talk about and leave you with today. I mentioned before, there's been studies done. Again, this problem has been looked at very, very detailed by the law enforcement community, by the Secret Service. They have a threat assessment center that looks at this stuff. And so statistically, you can see as you go from left to right, 20 or 2000 being kind of the start of the study, all the way across 20 years to 2020, the number of incidents are clearly increasing. Again, still statistically, the likelihood is very low, but again, given the fact that the number of events that are increasing, and because of the consequence of the events, we think there's a lot of merit to being more prepared, taking actions to making sure that yourself, your facilities are prepared for the potential of this type of threat. When we look at locations, and I think, Kelsey and I talked about before I came up here, she tried to, drive my thought process on how I would present this information to folks up here. Again, the statistics for some of what I'll talk about help make make the argument for why this is an important thing to think about. If you look at the left side of this, the highest number of incidents occurred at businesses that are open to pedestrian traffic. So people come in your place of business, then again, based on statistics, there is a likelihood that the potential is there. Businesses closed to pedestrian traffic weren't immune to it, though. They were pretty high as well, and then open spaces. So again, locations are important. We've got, as I mentioned before, schools, higher education are mentioned, healthcare facilities, houses of worship. So again, there's no one location, but some play a little bit higher than others. And then when we talk about businesses that are open to pedestrian traffic locations, small retail was the highest number at 21, followed by bars, large retail, offices, restaurants, and then it kind of plays out from there. So again, statistically, when you look at the number, likelihood is still very low, but again, the consequence for these events is very high. Recent events, and again, you don't have to, these are ones that I updated when I did a presentation back in September, but again, there's more events that have happened already. Again, as I mentioned before, sadly, these events continue to play out, and so again, that's why we think it's worth the effort to look at how you can prepare for this potential threat. We did my agency, along with the FBI, worked to put together a joint intelligence bulletin, specifically looking at the threat of an active shooter. There's a couple key points I want to pull out of this, just for your awareness. Again, the first bullet I touched on already, but many shooters were described as social isolates, harbored feelings of hate or anger, and some had reported contact with mental health professionals, but not in all cases. Mental health are commonly referred to as a potential contributing factor, but again, its impact on the attack really can only be speculative. And very few active shooters ever had previous arrests for violent crime. So again, from a public safety standpoint, that can often create a challenge, because if they're not engaging with the individual, then they're not going to have any visibility. And this is going to play into something I'm going to talk about a little bit later on in terms of the pathway to violence, because there's really a key role that I think we play as individuals, and potentially we can play as business owners and operators. Common catalysts or triggers that were observed when they look back at the study that I talked about. Again, if you look at this list of things that are here, what one of us cannot relate to one or two or three or even more of these? These are all life stressors that we all go through. Loss of a relationship, change in financial status, loss of a job. Again, these are things that we all deal with. The challenge is that for some reason, there are some individuals that lack the coping skills to be able to navigate through those difficult times. And so that's where we see these events unfold. So talking about the pathway to violence, this is really a key. A lot of behavioral psychologists have looked at this challenge, and one of the things that they've concluded is that there's really a role that can be played by more than just public safety officials. If you study any of these events, if you go and listen to the media after one of these happens, there's always somebody that comes forward that says, I knew that, he said that he was going to do something, or he was buying weapons, or, he was an angry person, and I knew that at some point he was going to snap. There's always somebody, usually a friend, a relative, a close family member, that had some indication that the individual was headed down that pathway. but didn't understand what to do with that information. Obviously, it's very clear if it finds its way into public safety channels, what steps should be taken, but when it's in the community or it's at the business, it's less clear on what things we should do. When we hear people say things that cause us concern, or when we see them do things that cause us concern. So that's why we're trying to talk about this concept of intervention, having a mechanism to be able to report when we see somebody that's headed down the pathway to violence, so that we can find a way to get them to resources that can help them navigate that life stressor that most of us have been able to figure out on our own. And again, that's why we say awareness plus action will equal prevention. That's really the only place that we see an opportunity to stay on the prevention side to prevent these things from happening, is that early recognition. So I'll talk about this briefly, but I have a video that talks about this as well. Again, this is largely recognized in the behavioral health community, but the pathway to violence really starts with a grievance. It can be real or perceived. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter. The individual feels they've had something that's slighted or wronged them. Again, that's their perception, and they're going to move with that. And then within that grievance, they begin to progress towards violent ideation, like, hey, I've had this thing happen to me. I think I need to get even. How am I going to get even? As part of that ideation, they may begin to write plans. They may begin the process of acquiring the means to right whatever perceived wrong that they have. They may look at research and planning as a way to go forward. And then finally, pre-attack preparation, probing, and breaching. These are all things that are recognized. And within each one of these, there's signs. There's things that people will see. If you're a friend, if you're a coworker, if you're a family member, that may give you some indication that this individual is headed down the wrong road. Again, I talked about hostile speech, thoughts replaced by action. Again, many shooters have done manifestos and very detailed documents about why they're doing what they're doing. Researching and developing plans, devoting time to gathering materials, forewarning friends, and then actually testing surveillance and testing their plan. But as I mentioned, the doctor from Virginia Tech is going to go into a little bit more detail. He provides a really good perspective on the pathway. And again, the one thing to take note is that, the further along they go, and he'll mention this, but the further down the road they are, we have less time to react. So that's why that early recognition is really key.
Let's for 1 second.
Of the transition from idea. So the path to violence is really a nice description of the transition from idea to action. Ideation about the use of violence in response to a perceived grievance is actually a pretty high base rate human behavior. Lots of people have those thoughts, at least in passing or intermittently, that don't escalate beyond the ideation point. So what folks like Calhoun and Weston did is lay out a process or a pathway that is pretty typical for escalation to serious violence or to targeted violence more generally. Foundationally, it starts with a grievance, a perceived or real wrongdoing. Oftentimes, the people that come to our attention are referred to as injustice collectors. It's not just one grievance, it may be a series of grievances over time. They begin to attribute the ideation of the use of violence to address that grievance. That tends to take some time to percolate and to develop, but when we get that ideation in response to the grievance rather than more adaptive coping styles or response strategies, that's when we begin to be more concerned. From the ideation then, if the person moves into a planning phase, you're investing more emotional and cognitive energy into not just, I'd like this person to pay for what they did, but how would I like them to pay? What would it take for that? What would I need for that? What weapons, if I were going to use a weapon? What would be my methodology? What are the barriers to that? What do I have to overcome? In describing that, I think you can see it takes more intensity of effort is the phrase that's more commonly used in the field. It takes more energy than just a fleeting thought or reaction about the use of violence in response to the grievance. The good news is that most people that engage themselves even in the planning phase stop at that point and don't move forward with it. It resolves the concern. They realize there are too many barriers, too many inhibitors to moving forward with the plan, and they stop. When they move into that next phase, which I would refer to as the acquisition phase, it's acquisition of the means, the method, the opportunity, and the proximity to the identified target or targets. That's when our concern increases significantly, and particularly in terms of the timeliness of potential harm. As a person is in that stage and they're acquiring the materials that they need to execute the plan that they've developed, and more accurately refine the plan that they've developed, we may now have very little time. And then the next step would be probing and breaching and surveillance, which may feed back into both the ideation, the planning, and the acquisition. So there is a feedback loop there as well. One of the things that's gathering increased attention about the pathway to violence, as we look at the horizontal dimension being time, as we move to the right, there tends to be a compression of time. So the process escalates in its rate as we move forward. Therefore, it's really incumbent upon processes that are identifying and detecting and assessing to be prepared to respond the further they see someone along the continuum.
I'll pause until you say go.
You're good.
Okay, so again, the reason I like to show that video is because it really does a good job of kind of highlighting the fact that, these aren't just flash incidents that these individuals undertake. They typically are well planned out. Again, as Dr. mentioned, I mean, it starts with that grievance, but the further along we get along that pathway, that time compression is really key. So as you're starting to see some of those, later signs of, testing, breaching, probing, getting what they need, proximity or access to where they want to be, that's where we recognize that we have less time to react. So it's really key to see those early phases. When we talk about potential indicators, and again, this is a little focused on the workplace. We've done a lot of work and a lot of research on workplace violence, but if you think about, and I've got another slide that will talk about this, when we look at active shooter events, when we talk about the workplace, sometimes their correlation to the workplace isn't that they work there. It's that, they have a spouse or a significant other that works there, that they're a customer or somebody that has some relationship to the facility. 50% of the events that have happened, the individual had some relationship to the location where the active shooter event unfolded. So again, it could be somebody that works there, or it could be somebody that just has a relationship to the facility. But again, the five most common indicators, again, a grievance, we talked about that already. Mental health challenges is still, referenced. Increased conflict, leakage of intent. Again, they're communicating that they're going to do something. With conflict, they're more vocal at the workplace or at the place that they're going to attempt to do something. Then obviously reduced quality of thinking or communication as they get further down the line. So again, difficult is, again, this is a challenge with all this trying to stay on the prevention side, is these symptoms are difficult to identify. And then the biggest challenge I think folks have is once you identify those symptoms, what do you do with the information? We encourage businesses to make sure that you have a plan in place that talks about this concept of, threat assessment. Schools have done a really good job about it. I'm sure that schools have some process here in the county where if the student communicates a threat, that they have a team of folks that get together and talk about, okay, what do they say? What do they do? They have behavioral health folks that will come in to be part of that team that kind of go through, hey, based on what they've said, based on what they've communicated and what they've done, here's where I think we are. And so that team comes up with a plan of action for how they want to address that threat. Many businesses are going down the same road. Bigger ones, obviously, but that have more resources, or it's much easier for them. I've seen some businesses that actually have on retainer, behavioral health folks that can be part of that threat assessment team. So if they get something that's communicated, that they can quickly reach out to them and say, hey, here's what happened. What's your perspective on the information that we have right now? And obviously, the big key is working closely with your law enforcement partners when you have concerns about public safety.
Glenn, in a situation that you're a small business or maybe just a small group of something, is there a recommendation what to do? I mean, if you're one person, it's not going to be a team of people that are going to be doing it. You'll be yourself figuring that out, deciding what you're going to do. I believe we talking a little bit about that at all, about how maybe people that are running a business themselves with just a smattering of employees what they would do or what an organization would do.
Right, no, I mean, it's a great question. And again, it's a challenge to create a resource that's one size fits all. So often, we point folks to local resources, and that's the reason I was glad that, Mike and the sheriff were willing to be part of the conversation today, because again, having that connection with your local emergency manager or your local law enforcement officials will help you understand what community resources may be available. Again, I know public health has done a lot of work on behavioral health. They've got teams that work to, in the aftermath of disasters, but those same folks that do that may have some capability here as well. So it's really a community approach to understand what resources are available in the community that can kind of help you navigate where you have an identified capability need or gap.
So Sheriff Pat and Mike, would you have any suggestions if somebody had something happening that wasn't an organization or a small business that didn't have a team like that? Should they be contacting you? Should they be contacting public health? What would you recommend?
I would say if it's possibly myself, possibly Pat, but public health and behavioral health employees at the county would definitely be a resource for somebody that's seen somebody going through some difficulties.
Yeah, I'd say depending on their actions or what they are saying, would depend on who you should contact at the county. If this is somebody going through a hard time, a loss of a loved one or divorce or just some seasonal affective disorder, you can reach out to us. We would tell you to reach out to public health. If it's something more specific and something more deliberate, I guess, reach out to Mike or myself. I think that would be the best way forward.
And so many things are open on the weekends, and other things don't operate necessarily on that same schedule. If maybe it's the county, is there somebody on emergency on the weekends?
Well, the sheriff's office is open. We're open 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. You can always call us, and then if it's something that we feel is maybe not a public safety or law enforcement issue, we can point you in the right direction for services on a Monday morning. If it's something that needs immediate attention, we can certainly do something about that.
Thank you.
Public health and human services does have an on-call social worker that would usually be referred by the dispatch center on off hours.
Thank you.
Okay, just to switch gears a little bit and talk about response. Again, I wanted to share information about the threat so you understood some context on the law enforcement side. I don't want to speak for the sheriff or the county, but again, broadly in generalities, obviously the first thing that law enforcement is going to care about when they're responding to an active shooter event is to identify and eliminate the threat. They want to be able to protect lives and prevent harm and injury. And so that's the first thing they're going to do. How they do that is going to be very different depending on what jurisdiction that you're in. They want to manage the incident. And then obviously they're going to secure the scene and conduct an investigation. There's been a lot of misconceptions as I've worked with businesses on what they thought law enforcement's role was. And again, so a lot of the resources that we put together, if you watch our online videos, which I'll share with Kelsey later, they talk about what that harm response looks like. And again, it's good for us to know that here in the community. It's good for us to know that anywhere we go, because that response is going to be very deliberate and very focused initially. And then once they've eliminated that threat, then the aftermath is a little bit going to look a little bit more normal. But that initial response can be very different. And as you guys know, especially in a community like this, you may get response from more than one jurisdiction. The call goes out over a public safety radio. Every law enforcement entity that's on the radio is going to get that call. Most are going to respond. So I was down in Minneapolis during the accent sign shooting, and they had they had 30 or 40 folks that responded to that. Many from Minneapolis PD, many from Hennepin County Sheriff's Office. There were federal agencies that responded to that. So again, the response happens very quickly. So you may see folks you may see a lot of folks that you don't know.
In this county, we do use the Armor radio system. And some people are kind of mistaken that we think we just have the sheriff's department, and there's many other law enforcement agencies, our Border Patrol, our Port Authority, DNR has law enforcement, U.S. Forest Service has law enforcement, Highway Patrol, of course, is up here. And so when an event happens, expect to see more than just the sheriff's deputy, that you may know. All these other law enforcement agencies do carry radios, and they have what's known as channels or top groups in our dispatch center. So they're all going to hear the call. And they have responded not only to armed intruder type situations, but search and rescues and other less minor, but they all respond and they all work together. So just know it's going to be more than just a local deputy.
Director Mike, could you speak to who takes the lead, or who would probably take the lead in a situation?
Most likely the sheriff's office, because they will most likely be the first on scene, but we have a very widespread county and we have a very small sheriff's department. So that is why we try to rely on these other agencies to help us when a large event happens. So it could be a quick response. I hope it's a quick response, but if something's happening up in Grand Portage, let's just say, and the closest deputy is down here, it's going to be a little stronger response.
So to my understanding, most of the conflicts that happen in maybe stores in Grand Marais might be shoplifting or something that is more a disagreement between people, and that the sheriff's office is happy to be called in that situation if something feels like it's escalating. Does that sound accurate?
Yes, yeah, I'll speak for Grant.
He's coming back on screen. Yeah, just that I know that in town we've had incidents sometimes with shoplifting or things like that or incidents, especially during the mass dynamic, that people were escalating things, and that the sheriff's office is happy to be called in situations that are escalating, that maybe haven't hit this point of needing protection necessarily, but need somebody to come in that is an outside force to de-escalate a dynamic.
Right. Yeah, I mean, any situation like that where, where violence is possible, or if it's somebody just acting in a disorderly manner, call the sheriff's office, absolutely. Especially if if a crime has been, if a crime has occurred, such as shoplifting or something else, and the person is getting belligerent, I would probably instruct your staff just to leave the whole thing alone and give us a call. Give us a description of the person, what happened. I mean, don't put yourself in somebody's face if there's a potential, for violence or somebody to get hurt.
Thank you.
I want to spend a little bit of time talking about, again, this next couple slides are basically things that we all should know. We promote run, hide, fight. I know there's a lot of traction behind Alice as a capability as well. At the end of the day, I don't care which one you use as long as you've got one that.
Could you explain what Alice is? I don't think everybody would know what Alice
So
is.
Alice is something that we're starting to see more frequently rolled out in communities, primarily schools. Alert, do you remember that?
Alert, lockdown. I can't remember what the acronym stands for. It's alert, lockdown. No, I can't.
Yeah, I can. It's a company actually branded that, so Alice is a thing. I'll do the research, so I promise I'll give it to you. But again, at the end of the day, run, hide, fight, and Alice are very similar. There's some nuanced differences in what they want you to do with Alice, but again, we promote run, hide, fight because it's the one that makes sense, for everybody. Obviously, you're a business owner or operator, you may have some things, and so it's very simply. I mean, if I'm concerned about a threat, it doesn't matter if it's a tornado or an active shooter. Best thing I can do is get away from the threat. That's why we promote run. If I can't get away from the threat, then I want to hide from it so that it can impact me. And obviously, the last option in this situation would be to fight. The reason that we talk about all three in the detail is because sometimes you may find yourself that somebody were to come through that door back there. We have very limited options to run or hide from the fight. We're pretty much in the fray, and so that's the reason we talk about fight, again, as a last resort.
Could you talk a little bit about, if you have a business organization, locking the door, like, is that a first response for people if something's coming towards you but it's not in the building yet, or should you be running first?
Yeah, so that's a great point, and again, that's some of what we talked about when we do the on-site assessments. I mean, if you're in a facility that can recognize a threat that's coming to you, if you've got cameras or people that watch the entryways, then obviously locking the facility down makes sense. And we see schools do that all the time when there's something happening in the community, they'll lock the school down to make sure that that threat can't get into the school. So that would obviously would make sense. But if it's, if we're in here and we hear a noise, something that sounds like gunfire out by the main entrance, and we have different options now. We can't lock it down because it's already in the building, but we may not be able to get everybody out the windows, but we can probably get enough stuff in front of the door and be able to hide into an interior space here where they couldn't come into the room until we can call law enforcement and ask for that response. So different, again, it's very situationally dependent. Again, there's no one cookie cutter that fits all.
And as we're talking about places that are trying to create plans, it may be an employee or an owner or a director or something that's there, but it might not be. What is kind of their responsibility for the other people in the room? Am I just responsible for myself? Am I responsible for the other people that have just come into my business or my organization? How do you have that sort of in your mind, what you do other than maybe just run, everybody just runs?
Right. No, I mean, it's a great question. And again, I can draw on a recent example that happened here in Minnesota. So Mall of America, they had a shooting event that occurred. The organization has put very detailed plans in place for how they respond to that event. Businesses know that when the alarm goes off, that they bring everybody that's close to their entrance as possible quickly in, and then they shut down. So they're actually locking down in individual spaces. The bigger anchor stores have similar processes in place. And so, again, I think the size of the organization is going to drive some of that. If you go to schools, as an example, schools have very detailed plans for how they respond to that from a response perspective. So again, I think that what we can do as an organization, if I've got a big or small business, hospitals is another example. They used to do codes all the time. Nobody knew what the codes meant unless you worked there. Now they've gone to plain language messaging. So we see announcements that come out that, hey, we have a security incident happening at the north entrance. We're asking everybody in the building to exit by a different entrance or a different exit. So there's ways that you can message. I'll leave responsibility up to the lawyers to decide what that means. But again, I think the more we can prepare ourselves, then I think the better off we are. So that's a long answer for that one.
Yeah,
And we've got resources that talk to all that. Again, at the end of the day, for an organization, the plan is what drives what you do, whether it's responding to a fire, responding to severe weather, or responding to an active shooter. And so the plan should cover what steps you're going to take. At the end of the day, we promote self-preservation. Obviously, we want to make sure that we're safe, and then we're doing all that we can for our friends, our coworkers, and our customers.
Thanks.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So this kind of covers a little bit of what I talked about. This is the run aspect again. Obviously, the individual responsibility, and I'll get to that a little bit later on as well. But if you go to a new location, you got to know how to get out. Most people I know that I came in this way, and that's the way I'm going to go back out. Always think about alternatives. And again, there's examples of where that's not worked out for folks. They actually wound up evacuating back through the threat. So always have an escape route in mind. Leave your belongings behind. Every one of these that's up here is up here for a reason. We've had people that went back to get a purse or a briefcase or a bag that became victims because they safely evacuated initially and then went back to get something they forgot. Warn others that there's a situation unfolding, help others to escape if possible, but evacuate regardless of what. If you think the right thing to do is run and your coworker thinks the right thing to do is hide, we won't know what the right answer is, but you have to go with the answer that you think is right for you. So if somebody wants to stay, say, okay, I'm leaving, but I'll let folks know, where you are when I get out. Don't attempt to move wounded people. Again, we've had folks that have become casualties because they tried to rent a raid. Know that for these events that there's a pretty detailed response coming that includes robust medical capabilities, and we've got great capabilities there. So render what aid you can quickly, let them know that you'll get somebody back to them as soon as you can, but continue your evacuation. The last one's here, keep your hands visible. Again, as I mentioned before, and the sheriff and Mike have talked about, you don't know who's going to be coming to your facility, so they may not be familiar with anybody. All they know is that there's a middle-aged white male with a weapon that's shooting at a facility. So if I'm a middle-aged guy running out, they're not going to know if I'm a friend or foe. So showing my hands is really the universal sign that I don't have anything on me that's going to harm you. And then just be prepared to respond to their directions when they tell you, hey, I want you to go over here and just follow the directions. Don't run directly at them, because again, very stressful situation for them. So you posing a potential threat may cause them to take an action that you're going to regret. And then call 911 with safe to do so. And I'll talk a little bit about the information bites that they're looking when you call 911. Hide is the next one. Obviously, not as ideal as run, but if we can't get away, and I talked about, the situation in the room we're in, there's one door that comes in. I've got a bunch of high windows that go out. They don't look very easy to open. So it may make more sense for me to hide in this location. So again, what we want to do is be out of the view. There's a slit window on the door back there. So we can shut the door, we can move things in front of the door, we can shut the lights off, and then we can move away from the window to make sure that we're not easily seen by the individual that would be in the hallway. Think about, we talked about cover and concealment. Cover is something that will actually prevent, gunfire from going through. Concealment just hides you from view. Just know that there's a difference. If it's, you're leaning against a wall right by the door that feels like it's drywall, maybe move further away.
Yeah, can you give some examples of what might be protection for a bullet versus
I
not?
think, these walls may have some, on the outer walls, if it's a masonry construction, are going to be a little bit better at, stopping gunfire. If it's a dry interior walls, typically will not have any protection at all. So being farther away from the door is good, especially if they can't see you. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I just was imagining that, like, would you grab a desk? Is that actually going to stop? I mean, like, what actually would stop a bullet? I guess I don't have that kind of knowledge.
Anything is better than nothing, but it's typically something that's going to be very dense. Wood won't do it unless it's a lot of layers of wood. So obviously, get as far away from where you think that threat's going to manifest itself. We've had folks in studying these that have shot through doors and the walls around doors. So moving away from doorways. Again, if we're going to, this room is the example. Shut the door, push furniture in front of the door, maybe move to that corner over there. It's farthest away from the door and least likely to be impacted if they're going to try to shoot through the door. Yeah, and I talked about the rest of these here already. And then obviously as a last resort, fight. It's obviously, as I mentioned, it is the last resort. But again, if somebody comes through the doorway back there, we have very limited options. So again, we've seen this play out favorably for folks that have, attempted to, intervene the individual and have been successful in doing it. Or in some cases, sadly, they were unsuccessful, but they prevented the individual from harming or killing others. So again, act as aggressively as possible as you can against the individual. You can throw items, use whatever's at your close at hand to be able to do that. Yell, but really the key is to commit to your actions. Again, I've done this training for businesses and actually have done walkthroughs with them, and some of the folks in the building actually have taken measures to make sure that, hey, by my door I've got a thing that I can put that wedges the door shut so that it doesn't lock from the outside, so they could come in, but I can prevent them from coming in if I use this device. I've got something close by my desk that I can use as a weapon if somebody comes in my office. So again, but as I mentioned before, if you mentally haven't gotten there, then if you find yourself in that situation, you're a little bit more challenged. So that's the reason we ask folks to think about run, hide, fight. I'll show the video. I think we're still going to be on time. This is a video that we have on our website. I encourage everybody to resource to kind of orient folks to exactly what I just talked about.
Active shooter events can occur anywhere at any time, and frequently involve individuals attempting to kill others indiscriminately. These events are unpredictable and can evolve quickly. For this reason, whenever you enter a building as an employee, guest, or customer, you must be prepared and know what it is you will do if faced with the worst-case scenario, even if it's just another day at the office.
Last night, every time I closed my eyes, all I could see were slide decks.
Don't remind me. Sorry I'm late. Did I miss anything?
Hey, you got a minute to catch me up on that thing?
Yeah, come on in. Is Amelia here too?
Let me grab her, okay?
Yeah, thank you.
When startled by a gunshot, it's a natural human reaction to freeze. Unfortunately, this response leaves you vulnerable to what might come next. If you see someone frozen in place in this type of situation, make your best attempt to assist them.
I think it's critical that we find a way to make sure this doesn't happen again. We've wasted way too much time.
That's gunfire.
Are you sure that was a gunshot?
That's gunfire.
Was it really a gunshot? Call the police.
Move over there. Come on, get away from the door.
If you can't easily evacuate, the best option is to hide. Lock the door, stay close to the ground, and try to find cover from any stray gunfire that may penetrate the walls. If you're able, call 911.
What was that?
Sounded like a gunshot. What should we do?
Come on, let's get out of here.
When possible, the best alternative in an active shooter event is to run. If your path is clear and you can safely reach an exit, evacuate as soon as possible. Of course, some may not have such easy access to a safe exit. In these situations, you must decide for yourself whether it is best to evacuate or to hide. As with any of these options, if you do choose to run, commit to this action. And remember, police will be arriving to assist you and to evacuate the wounded, so be sure to keep your hands up and empty as you clear the building. Otherwise, put simply, don't stop running. Once clear of danger, make contact with 911 to assist their response by providing them information about the shooter, the weapons they're carrying, and the amount of wounded that may still need medical assistance. If you have been unable to evacuate and are trapped in the facility during an active shooter situation, remember, making the decision to hide does not prevent you from putting up a fight later. If you are confronted by the active shooter, you have to assume that your actions are all that stand between yourself, your colleagues, and grave harm. Fight for your life. Search around you for sharp or heavy objects that you may use to disable the attacker. Collaborate with those around you to ensure you aren't acting alone. You're taking action for your survival, so do not hold back, and do not stop fighting until you know beyond certainty that you are safe. Committing to run, to hide, or to fight will keep you safer than if you freeze during a crisis. Remember to prioritize your safety. If you come across those who are wounded and may need assistance, assist them if you can, but do not let them inhibit your escape. As an individual, the most important thing you can do to keep yourself safe, whether it is to run, hide, or to fight, is to commit to your decision and to continuously reevaluate the situation. If you own a business or operate a large public facility, you may be able to better enable individual response to such events by identifying emergency escape routes and exits. Use this information to design evacuation plans that can be used by employees and guests to your facility. Reach out to law enforcement to see if they'll come to your facility and assist you in drafting your response plan or guide you to training that may assist employees in their survival. Remember, this training may be the difference between life or death. See about technology you may be able to incorporate to make your facility safer, which may include audio or visual cues for those with access and functional needs. Plan for and train your employees to assist those who may not be able to run, hide, or fight. Equip them with a first aid or a go kit, an emergency ladder in case you're not on the first story, and explore the possibility of mass notification technologies, which may enable you to alert those in the area of any present dangers. Of course, the hope is that neither you nor any of your friends or colleagues will ever be confronted with an active shooter situation. However, should the worst case occur, know that you can always run, hide, or fight.
So I think the video does a pretty,
You're great.
I think the video does a great job of, again, kind of highlighting a lot of what I talked about and answers some of the questions that Kelsey had, I think, or questions that came from the folks that are aligned. But again, it's going to be obviously business specific in terms of, what measures make sense. If you're a big business, then obviously you may have more resources. If you're a smaller business that may have only one or two folks there, then there's probably simpler measures that you can do. But again, all of those are really going to help enhance the likelihood that if you find yourself in a situation that you're going to survive. Some of the prevention tools that we talked about, in addition to what I've already mentioned, pre-employment background checks. Somebody asked about that. We encourage that. Again, regardless of what size your business is, there's things that will come out of a pre-employment screening that may indicate that individuals may be predisposed to some of this. Training staff on behavioral science. I talked about that already. The pathway to violence, really understanding the importance of the role that we potentially can play in identifying individuals that are potentially headed down that pathway. Obviously having a policy in place that your facility for weapons and violence, most organizations do, but I've been surprised by ones that didn't have any policy at all. So when we look at some of these individuals that have done this, they actually tested procedures, brought weapons to work and things like that. So, or in the facility. There have been some discussions about HIPAA, which is the healthcare, on the healthcare side, and FERPA on whether or not you can report. Again, when it comes to life safety, individuals that are communicating that they're headed down this pathway, there are exceptions to that in HIPAA and FERPA. So.
And just to be clear, if you are not a healthcare facility, you aren't being held to HIPAA. Like if somebody walks into your business and says, I'm having a challenge,
right,
that is it. You aren't
right.
responsible for that.
Yeah. This has come up more in schools, where, because it's a behavioral health issue, and there's been some concerns, well, if they're getting treatment, then we can't really communicate because it's a healthcare thing. But when it comes to, life safety, there are exceptions that allow you to make sure that the right folks know when somebody's communicated a threat or indicated that they're going to, take action with some type of violence. And then, that last one just talks about that culture of caring for all employees. I mean, again, the slide says employees, but again, I extend that to include a much broader look at the community. Again, people go through difficult times. Typically the only thing they need is that one person that's going to help them get over that obstacle, and you can be that one person. Whether it's getting them access to resources, as Mike talked about, through your public health, or whether it's something else. So I can just be aware of that.
Any suggestions for empowering your coworkers, your staff, to feel like they could report something, or that they could lock the door if they don't feel safe, or they could do those things, and like some guides on that? Is there anything out there that they could be utilizing for resources, or any tips you would have?
Well, again, so I get that question commonly. I've actually worked with facilities where, the person that was at the front door that could see the individual that potentially could be coming in with a weapon didn't have the authority to be able to lock the building down. So really that comes out in the planning. So develop a plan that makes sense for the facility, and then exercise the plan. Mike will recognize the value of making sure that, if it's worth the effort to put the plan in place, then exercise it. Go through a couple of drills, have the conversation so that folks know who's allowed to, press the alarm or to lock the doors down. In terms of reporting, again, if it's a bigger organization, that tends to be a conversation with human capital to make sure that you've got access to those resources in place. And again, I would argue that for all of the active shooter events that that we've looked at and that I talked about, it was likely an opportunity for intervention. So that's really the obstacle that we have to get over, is to figure out how to be better about communicating that. That intervention doesn't have to be to a negative. It could make sure that that individual gets the counseling or the resources that they need. to navigate that different, that difficult life obstacle that they're going through at the time. So the outcome can actually be a good outcome. Most people tend to focus on the negative, and really it's not necessarily negative. It's like, hey, Glenn made some concerning comments in the break room today. I think I should let my supervisor know so that we can, get maybe Glenn access to resources that he may need help in navigate that. So it's just promoting that within the organization is key. We've got resources, and I'll talk more about some of the things that we have. On the risk analysis side of the house, again, I think Mike will appreciate this. I won't say Thyra because I know how much he probably likes it. But, when we talk about risk analysis, we really look at 3 components of risk, which is threat, vulnerability, and consequence. So that little circle there in the center, that's really the convergence of the 3. So if there's a threat out there, but I'm not vulnerable to it, then I probably don't need to be concerned about it. If I'm vulnerable to a potential threat and I've got a consequence related to that threat, then that's where that overlap happens. And those are really areas that we should focus on. Again, assessing risk. And so it doesn't matter what the threat is. It could be the threat of severe weather, a tornado, it could be a derecho, it could be wildland fire, or it could be the threat of an active shooter. If you've got vulnerability and consequence related to that threat, and the threat is a potential that could impact you, then it's likely that you should be doing something to at least address what you're going to do related to that threat. And really what we're trying to do is mitigate risk at the end of the day. Some things we can never completely get rid of. We can't move. You could always move to a different location if you don't like severe winter weather. But again, the more practical approach is to find ways to mitigate threat. And so consequence, vulnerability, and threat are sometimes things that we can't control, but what we can control is how we coordinate the systems we put in place, the procedures and the training specifically related to that, with the intent on tipping the scale in our favor. I talked a little bit about this already, but it's kind of an interesting conversation depending on where you go. But I believe, and obviously the slide indicates that we believe, that we all play a role in preparedness. There's individual things that we should be doing that keeps Mike, lets him sleep at night. If he knows everybody in the communities, got a plan for how they're going to evacuate in the event of a wildland fire, or they've got, a generator and gas at home in the event that the power goes down because it's severe weather. Those are individual things that we do to be better prepared. And obviously, the organization has some responsibility, the community does things as well, but it really all starts with the individual. We can't assume away, that somebody's going to take care of all the things that I should be doing as an individual to prepare me for threats. I have to own some of that. So that's what we're asking folks to think about specifically related to this threat. Again, it's more likely that you're going to encounter this away from work or away from where you live than it is that it's going to be in the workplace. And so again, being prepared individually really helps, again, lessen the likelihood that you're going to be impacted or impacted severely. I talked a little bit about resources, and again, this is really the focus of what I wanted to share. So again, when you talk about preparedness, the preparedness plan really looks at 5 pillars: prevention, protection, mitigation, response, and recovery. We've put together a lot of resources specifically related to the threat of active shooter. We're not asking folks to develop a single plan that deals with it. It should really be something that is incorporated into a plan that you already have. Most organizations that I work with have an emergency action plan that covers fire, covers severe weather, it covers other things that are more endemic to the area that you're located in. And so really active shooter should just be another component to that. That plan we have resources that talk very specifically to that. And again, I'll share with Kelsey the slides so that you can navigate to those resources on your own. And then to further assist, we've also got videos that can walk folks through how to put that emergency action plan in place. And FEMA obviously has a lot of great resources. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't mention your local emergency manager as well. Again, all great ways to find resources to look at how to better develop emergency action plans that are meaningful for your facility or your business, whether it's large or small. Again, I think these are things that everybody should have in place. For a big organization, it may be more complex. For a small shop, it may be as simple as a flip chart. Hey, fire, here's the 5 things that I need to do for a fire. So again, we've got resources that can help folks in that regard as well.
Would you recommend that more people would put this into their manual, or that this is a separate document?
Again, I think if it's a one-stop shop that covers all the threats and hazards that you're concerned about, it's more likely to be used more frequently. And again, the key is to write the plan, but then also to exercise the plan, and then with some regularity review the plan. You know, most organizations that are mature of this will review it at least once a year. They'll exercise it at least once a year as well. So we would encourage that. We also have developed a pretty good suite of online training as well. We partnered with FEMA. So some of these things are active shooter specific. So prevention, you can make a difference. Workplace security awareness is one that's general. It would apply to whether you're in an area where you're concerned about security threats from crime or other criminal activity. Obviously, the video that I showed is part of the active shooter one. These are all about 45 minutes long. They generate a certificate. So if you're an organization that has a training requirement for your employees, I've seen folks actually integrate these into their overall training plan. And again, I'll have all this for Kelsey so that she can share it out with folks that are here and then folks that are online. Some things I wanted to talk about, these are newer resources that we put together, non-confrontational techniques to kind of de-escalate a situation. So it speaks maybe a little bit to the scenario that you talked about again, but to reinforce what the sheriff said, I mean, when you feel that you're in danger, then you should try to remove yourself from the situation. But we've seen we've seen things that have been prevented because of these two programs that I'll talk about. So the first one is the power of hello. Really, it's a quick way. I mean, Walmart, I think, capitalized on this. When you look at the Walmart readers, you think they're there to greet, but they're really there to kind of get a sense of what your purpose for being in the store is. People that are going there with ill intent will have some characteristics about them that will be easy for them to pick up on when they're doing that. And oftentimes the power of hello can de-escalate things as well. It shows individuals that you're concerned about why they're there, and maybe you can have some further conversation after that hello. So this is a great resource. We've got a lot more, and the reason that there's a web link there for that is you can navigate to the site. We've again seen folks that have a customer interface that have sent, had their employees go through this so that they can integrate it into their overall employee training plan. And then our de-escalation series is the same thing. This is really an ask that we had. We've got obviously a lot of people that have businesses that interact with the public frequently. And so they were concerned that they really didn't have a good understanding of what things they can do to train their workforce on how to de-escalate a situation. So again, everybody's been or seen the frustrated customer. You're angry about something that happened, whether you bought something or ate something and you weren't happy with it. Oftentimes how the individual that responds to how you're concerned is the one that determines whether you get angrier or you're calmed down a little bit. And so these resources just talk about how you can train folks to provide resources that can kind of help them navigate that de-escalation piece. But again, as the sheriff mentioned, at the end of the day, de-escalation should end when you feel concerned about your safety. And you should have a plan that, talks about what you're going to do and how you're going to remove yourself from that situation. So, and they talk about that in the resources as well. I wanted to highlight this one as well. FEMA's pushed this a little bit. I don't know how much it makes its way out there, but you are the help until help arrives. So I like to share this with businesses that I work with or communities that are a little bit geographically isolated, maybe from some of the more the first responder resources, to know that hey, there's things that you can do in your business to increase the likelihood that you can make it past that hump until help arrives. Our focus on this is obviously things like making sure that you've got stop and bleed kits available, or that you've done training and there's resources specifically available online that talk about how you can train your staff to just do the simple things, the ABCs that are often talked about when you go to first aid training. And again, you are the help until help arrives is really a key. It's just again another training component for the workforce. It may be a little bit resources involved, but I think most organizations already have first aid kits or things like that. The stop and bleed thing is a little bit newer because again, that specifically responds to things like active shooter or edge weapons, where somebody's got a significant bleed, and there's quick things that we can do to stop that bleeding to increase the likelihood that they'll be more likely to survive that event. And again, resource link at the bottom of the page as well. See something, say something. I think we talked about this a little bit. I mean, this has been a campaign that we've had since 2010. It's all across the country now. Started with the New York Port Authority. They trademarked see something, say something. But again, we promote this far and wide. Originally designed to prevent an act of terrorism, but really it's had so many other collateral benefits, from human trafficking to vulnerable adults to lost kids. So again, it's really just recognizes the fact that we all play a role in security. When we see something, I mean, you guys know what your community looks like better than I ever will. You're driving down the road, you see somebody that's hanging out on the, you know, the backside of a business that has never been there, and doesn't look like they should be there, say something, let somebody know. There's really a high likelihood that we can prevent something from happening if folks that see something out of the ordinary take the opportunity to say something to somebody that can do something about it.
With that in mind, Sheriff Pat, if people, should they be calling 911 or should they be calling like the sheriff's office, the non-emergency line, for things that might not be urgent, but they're concerned about?
If they're concerned, you know, it's like, if you're concerned enough to call, I'd say call 911. If you know the non-emergency number and you feel comfortable calling that, that's fine. What I will say, just so everybody knows, that when you do call 911, I want everybody to know this. I speak about this quite often, that there's a gap. Okay, when you dial 911 and it's answered, it sounds like it's answered, you're going to be talking away. There's nobody there. There's like a 5-second gap before somebody will actually start talking. So then somebody's going to get on there saying, you know, 911, what's the address of the emergency, and then you're going to have to do it all over again. So it's obviously it's not the best system around, but it's the only system we have. So when you dial 911 and you're going to expect somebody there immediately, it's not going to happen. It's going to go to 5 seconds delay. Yeah,
All right, when we in this room call 911 or call 3030, is it going to the same place?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's the same resource basically, but I mean, person.
Right.
Okay.
It goes to our dispatch.
Okay.
Either way.
And if we're calling from like a building landline or from our cell phone, do you automatically get an address, or is there no address that you're seeing associated?
We'll get an address if you're using a landline. If you're using a cell phone, we'll get coordinates, which the dispatchers do have the ability to punch those coordinates into our system and, you know, give a general area. But cell phones, I mean, you know, when we're trying to locate somebody and trying to triangulate a cell phone, you know, it could be give or take a mile.
Oh.
So depending on the signal, depending on how close you are to towers, it's not exact.
Thank you.
Back to the see something, say something. I did print some pamphlets if folks want to take them, and some flyers. It's a great program. It does spell out in there what you should be looking for, and kind of defense words. You know, don't be calling if you got a stray cat in your yard, but if it's something that don't look right, then you should be telling somebody, your supervisor. Put your heads together and decide, yeah, I think we better call the sheriff.
We actually had a school shooting that was prevented here in Minnesota because a woman that was at home looking out her back window saw some activity that just didn't fit for her, and so she called. And it turned out to be an individual that was at a storage unit that had a mask, you know, the equipment, the means, and the methods to be able to undertake a school shooting. And after, you know, making contact with him and all the subsequent investigation, he was pretty close to doing that. So that was, again, he never had contact with law enforcement previously, so there were no indicators. He was below the radar, but it was a citizen that prevented that from happening. So again, that's why I say we all can play a role in this. My next slide is actually a video, so it's a short one, and I think it kind of drives home the importance of the see something, say something message.
Okay, you're good.
Why? Why take a chance? Why risk a mistake? Why say something? We all have reasons why we choose to ignore the things that give us pause, that seem out of place, that don't feel right. The word why can either paralyze us or empower us to stand up and protect what we love. So if you see something, why do you say something?
I see safe for my family.
I see safe for my friends.
I see say so that they are safe.
We see say for each other.
I see say because all of this matters.
We all have something worth protecting, a why that unifies this community we're all a part of. So protect your everyday. Report suspicious activity to local authorities. If you see something, say something.
Pretty short video. I think it does a great job to just message the importance of why we see something and say something. And I think that was my last line. So
Wonderful. We invite you guys to ask questions. If you're online, you're welcome to put them in the chat and I'll read them off of a different person. Invite you to ask.
I have a question. So when we're doing our, like putting together our plans and of the prevention piece, a lot of our businesses have like 3 employees. And like say, I would imagine that the first step would be you talk to your supervisor. If you see, you know, suspicious, you don't go straight to the authorities, but what if it's your manager or the owner that you have a question on? Like, do you have examples of what could be done in a smaller piece like that and how to empower employees to take that action if who they're supposed to go to is who they're concerned about?
right, yeah, no, again, that's always the challenge, especially if it's, you know, somebody in the organization. We talk a lot about insider threat, and that's that comfort level to recognize that, hey, something doesn't feel right. I know I need to say something, and how am I going to do that? Again, we've got great examples for how to develop plans, but at the end of the day, in a situation like that, it's really going to be the willingness to have a conversation with somebody outside the organization to elevate the concern that you have. If I get the gist of what you're asking. Correct.
Yeah, so like you would put in your, like in your handbook that you give to employees, like if this is a situation where you feel like you can't go to a supervisor, you would go to social.
Yeah, you can go outside. Again, you guys within the plan gotta, you know, figure out what the right solution is. I mean, if somebody that you work for is communicating a threat or indicating that they're going to undertake some act of violence, then that may be a different path than somebody that has said they're frustrated and that, you know, going through a difficult time because of a divorce. I mean, those are 2 different scenarios. You know, the threat or violence, that's more immediate. That may be a different phone call, you know, than the one where they indicate that they're going through a life stressor and they're looking, you know, there might be some other resources that you want to plug them into or that they could connect with, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and it may be as much as even domestic violence center, depending on what's happening in their lives and things. I mean, I know that a long time ago, there was things happening in the community that was a partner violence situation. So that was affiliated with businesses that were being targeted based on that. So just depends on all those dynamics, right? Well, both Pat and, oh, go ahead. Yeah.
So can you tell us what you will address tomorrow night in the
the community?
Yeah, so for tomorrow was just going to be more focused on a brief, because I think that you have to provide a little context to the threat. Again, when I do work with businesses, they recognize that active shooter is something they should be concerned about. It gets a little bit different when you talk to, you know, individuals that, hey, why do I, you know, active, this is Grand Marais, it's a small community, why would I be worried about? And so the context for the threat is to show that, hey, you know, this is something that is on the uptick, you know, the likelihood is still very low, but it's a threat that you should at least think about. And obviously the different locations they have happened in are ones that are places that we would recreate, and nightclubs, theaters, concerts. I mean, a variety of different locations. I mean, all don't stay where we live, or maybe we travel to other locations. So I think understanding what the threat looks like, but then to provide resources on the very simple things that I talked about. Here's the 3 things that you should know, run, hide, fight. If you haven't watched our video or seen the video, here's where you can find it on the web. That will give you some real basic understanding of, if you hear the gunshots, here's the things that you should be thinking about. You know, the individual responsibility for knowing when I go to a new location. location. I should know about how I got in, where I can get out, know my exit, those basic things. Then I'll talk a little bit about the see something, say something thing again as well. Just really provide that baseline thing of all things that, you know, the individual should understand specifically related to
An individual as we're moving through the world.
Right.
Right. And then, can you talk also about your services that you're offering for evaluation this week?
Yeah, so I'm
Businesses?
up here until Thursday, so we actually offer free resources to folks that want to take advantage of it. For those that are, you know, familiar with vulnerability assessment, it looks a lot like that. We call it a security assessment at first entry, but we look at the very basic things about the facility. We talk a little bit about, you know, planning, what plans do you have in place? So that's where it would come up with whether or not you've got plans that deal with human caused things. We'll look at the exterior of the facility to see how you secure entry in, what plans you have in place with regards to security. If you've got security technology like CCTV or alarm systems, how you use those. And then we also look at how you're connected with your first responders as well. And then we provide a product back, and then embedded in that product will be, like I've done with the presentation here, a lot of links that will take you to different sites. Again, we've got resources if you don't have a security plan that can help you navigate how to develop a security plan for your facility. If you don't have an emergency action plan that covers active shooter, again, as today we talked about that. So, yeah.
And this is for businesses in our community,
Organizations as well.
businesses and organizations, and then it'll take about an hour. you
Depending
think?
on the size. I mean, if it's small, you know, if we're talking a storefront, it could be a little bit quicker than that.
Okay,
If it's a really big facility, it could take a little bit longer. So it just kind of depends.
yeah. Oh, and then how did they contact you, Kelsey?
They can,
Yeah.
follow them up, yeah.
Okay.
One of the questions I know that I had before was, where would we know if there was something happening in our community? Where would we go to look? Or would we be alerted in some way? Say something was happening downtown Grand Marais and a store next to me, how would I know that that's happening? Other than maybe hearing loud noises in the street?
You probably wouldn't, unfortunately. We do have notification systems. The first one we have, it's called Code Red. But that system is dependent upon people registering themselves, their phone numbers into that system. And that being said, even when we have the system and we have, you know, the dispatchers can go on and pick out they can geofence certain places to give everybody in that area a call if there's something going on. But unfortunately, we don't sometimes have the time to do that because we have one dispatcher on. He or she may be dealing with responders, dealing with law enforcement, you know, fire, medical, plus other things going on. They don't have the luxury to take the time to make that notification.
Are there
How do
other
you sign
questions?
up for that notification?
Yeah.
It's on the county website.
Code Red.
Code Red.
Code Red. So like if a fire was sweeping into town, what might be it? Something that you would say. Okay.
Yeah, that any kind of natural disaster. We have used it before. You know, when we've had the fires up on the trailer. You know, if there's say there's something going on at the school, some type of threat up there, we could use it for that, or the courthouse. Any type of situation where there's emergency or people need to be notified, you know, stay away from this place here. And the dispatcher has the time, you know, to get it out, which in the daytime probably can get it out because there'll be somebody else coming up there to help the dispatcher. But you know, it's the hours in between, you know, evenings, early mornings, weekends. There's only one dispatcher on. It's pretty tough for them just to get to handle the emergency at hand, let alone do something extra.
And to that point, there's just, we're a long distance from things, and you know, there's so many people working sometimes. Could you talk a little bit about response time? I mean, if you were, say, maybe in Grand Portage right now and you're watching this video, you know, is there an expectation that there'll be somebody there in 15 minutes, half an hour? I mean,
that's you know, it's pretty subjective, actually, depending
on the day.
On the day, on the staffing levels, you know, right now, you know, coming up, we're going to have a big trial at the courthouse. That is chewing up a ton of our resources at the sheriff's office, providing court security, bailiff duties, you know, running prisoners around, things like that. So, you know, we're gonna be shorthanded, at patrol. So, if we have one person on and that person happens to be in Grand Portage and there's something going on at Topsy, it's gonna be an hour before someone gets there, unfortunately.
I just think that's important when you're thinking about your plans for yourself or for your businesses, organizations, to imagine that it may be an extended period of time that there wouldn't be a response. So you are having to make some stronger plans for your own business.
Or DNR or Forest Service, you know, like Mike was saying, other people can show up too if it's a situation where they feel like they can add value, I would assume.
Does that get coordinated on some level at all? I just imagine the Uvalde shooting and let border patrols first. I imagine in our communities, you know, our search and rescue, our emergency responders, and also our border are all around us, that they might be the first to a situation. Does there become an automatic lead that comes in that people should be talking to or knowing who to interact with?
Well, we have done some training with you know, a coordinated response in the past. We haven't done it for a few years. And it was called 3 Echo training. And what that is you coordinate, you know, public safety, fire, and medical for a response to a significant event. And we did train with Border Patrol, DNR, Forest Service, basically anybody who's involved with public safety. And what that does is, it was kind of like what Glenn was talking about before, is if there's an event, you know, if the first responders get there, or the fire guys get there, or the ambulance gets there before we can get there, you know, they're instructed just to stage in an area, and it might be a little while before we get there, and then they still don't go in when we get in. We go in there, and Glenn said, you know, we find the threat and we neutralize the threat before we can get anybody else inside that building, because you're not going to take fire staff or medical staff inside an active situation, because you're just endangering everybody else. So yeah, while we have all these responders around us, it depends on who they are, what they're trained for, what they can do. So every incident, I guess, is special in the fact that the dynamics can dictate who goes where.
I remember listening to you talk a while ago, Sheriff, and you mentioned that families or businesses or people might consider having a safe spot someplace outside of their buildings or organizations that they would go to. So in a chaos situation, you might be able to plan that you would go to, say in our building, you would go over to the courthouse, or you would go to another place that people would know to look for you. That would be a safer spot. Would you still recommend that, or is that something that's still an idea out there?
I would, and Mike, we talk about this often, you know, with the courthouse, with our run, hide, fight plan. You know, if you can run, absolutely, you run, get out of the building, and then each individual department has a certain place where everybody's supposed to gather. And that's number one, to keep everybody safe, and number two, to account for everybody, you know, and when everybody gets there and say, oh, well, where's Bob? Bob's not here. Then we have a problem. And then you can relate that to responders, that, you know, we have everybody except for one person. So that's the two reasons. And if Mike wants to say anything more on that.
Yeah, we did, last September, we did do a armed intruder training at the courthouse for all of the county employees. And that's actually, we kind of stemmed this training, but some of the same questions I heard today were heard then. And you know, it's an individual. We talked about the same thing that you guys talked about here. What if there's somebody at the auditor's window and the rest of alarm goes off? Well, our plan is to ask them to come inside. We're locking them in there with them. But if they choose to, no, I'm getting out of here, well, that's their choice. But as Pat said, we do have things in place, even if it's cold weather, to go to another building. We don't like to publicize some of that too much, because armed intruders are smart people too. So they all know we're going from here to here. They might have somebody else there. So.
I know that sometimes talking about this is hard, and I can imagine, especially if you're talking about with your staff or your coworkers, or even just bringing it up with people. There's been instances in our community that people might have some triggering moments when talking about this. Any suggestions about talking about this really sensitively or thoughtfully with those that might not feel like they want to think about it, or they already had something happen in their life that this is already a scary concept. Any suggestion?
I'll just take part of this question. And kind of backtracking what Glenn talked about before, you know, if you do have this conversation with your staff or your employees or whoever you're going to have it with, make sure that when something does happen, you use plain language. Okay. I mean, even law enforcement has gone away from the codes and all the rest of that stuff because it's for a couple reasons. Number one is when you're panicked and you're trying to remember a code for, okay, what am I supposed to say or what am I supposed to say? Instead of saying, you know, there's a threat in the building, get out. Then people are like, oh, wow, that's pretty direct. You know, and number two, which we experience at the county, is the turnover. So if you're turning staff over and you're not onboarding them directly, so you know, sitting them down, say, okay, this and this and this, you need to know these words for this, or it's much easier just to use direct language. And as far as speaking to them about something like this, if they're uncomfortable, you know, I guess, you know, for the county, you know, we have the employee assistance program. So we can get somebody, you know, some therapist or somebody to sit down with us, or they can do it with HR, whoever it is. As far as a private business, I don't know. I mean, it's tough. It's, you know, I personally, I would just sit them down and say, hey, you need to know this, okay? And not just for you, but for everybody else in the store who's you know, under your blanket right there. If there's people in your store or when you're working, you're not responsible for them, but you know, if you have a chance to help them, you should.
Any other responses to that?
I mean, it's a difficult conversation to have. It's a very somber topic. You know, when you talk about the likelihood that you could find yourself in an active shooter situation. Again, you know, the reason I upfront say, hey, I don't want you to think I'm fear mongering and that this is going to happen to you tomorrow. But, you know, if you look at the instances that have happened and you follow the trend, there is an increase. The likelihood, you know, statistically is still very small, but again, the consequences are very high. So very simple things that we can do to make ourselves more safe. Why wouldn't we want to be more safe?
Well, I appreciate all the information you've shared today, and thank you everybody for attending. I encourage you to hang out a little bit longer if you have individual questions or if you're wanting to work through anything. And we are happy to bring Glenn back in the future if there's something that you feel like we really need to be addressing in a different way in the future. And I know that we have a mix of attendees still today. We have people that work with youth, all the way to those that have organizations, to those that are county or city, and also those that are small business. So all of our needs aren't exactly the same. So feel free to always send those emails to me, and I also can make sure that Glenn follows back up with you. Or I'm sure Sheriff Pat and Mike are great to contact as well if you have follow-up questions as well.
I do have another flyer here, and this is the type of information you're going to find on Glenn's website.
Okay.
I mean, in the Minnesota Department of Public Safety, if you look under Homeland Security and Emergency Management, they have very similar publications like this, not only for armed intruders, but active shooters, but severe weather, winter weather, and just a ton of information. Help yourself to anything there you like. And thank you for being here.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.